Yes, this is another Confessions podcast from your friends on Drive Time at Radio 2. This week's concise collection of terrible tales lets mark the alliteration as we go. Some sibling simulation, 6. Exploding effluent, very good, 8. Some science fiction sins, doesn't really work, 6. And a buttery bungle, which I do like, 7. But who will you forgive? Here are the stories. Here's tonight's tale. It comes from Alan. Tonight's confession. Thank you for it. It's another Drive Time confession. Send yours via the website, or you can email confessions@bbc.co.uk. Dear Collective, I recently was made aware of the TV show The Big Bang Theory when my boss lent me the first series on DVD. And each evening, my wife Janet and I settled down to enjoy our half-hour fix of Leonard and Sheldon, who are the two main characters. When watching it the other evening, the story consisted of Leonard getting rid of his collection of space toys. And when his friends tried to stop him, he threatened to break open a still-packaged, unopened Geordie LaForge Star Trek The Next Generation figure with detachable visor. And it was at this point that my blood ran cold. Has anyone got one of those? Sally, I would imagine you've got a whole range of Star Trek figures.
Yeah. In the loft.
Okay. Anyway, my blood ran cold. I was immediately transported back to a long time ago in a galaxy far away, or in this case, 25 years, to our house in Knotty Ash, just around the corner from Ken Dodd. On the evening in question, I had been left in charge of bedtime for the children, whilst Janet took Ralph, our dog, for a walk. My son Paul was 5 years old at the time, and from Star Wars to Star Trek, he was completely space mad. And his current pride and joy was, as you guessed it, a Geordie LaForge figure with detachable visor. I had found Paul sitting gorging himself on some chocolate, and when I attempted to tell him that he'd eaten enough and it was now bedtime, it resulted in the most extraordinary tantrum. Paul was duly packed off to bed, and I returned downstairs to tidy up the toys. This was a most important job, as Ralph the dog had a fondness for picking up stray toys and hiding them in various inaccessible places around the house. It suddenly seemed a good idea, in light of the aforementioned tantrum, to teach young Paul a lesson. So I decided to leave the Geordie toy out for Ralph to pick up and do what he did best, to hide it somewhere in an unknown dark recess in the house. Janet duly returned, and Ralph sniffed around and suddenly became very animated and excited at the sight of the Star Trek figure lying before him. What I had not considered was that the head of the figure had been liberally smeared with chocolate, and to my horror, Ralph picked up the toy, detached the chocolate-encrusted detachable visor, and promptly swallowed an integral part of Paul's pride and joy. Yeah. You're probably already ahead of me. Yeah. The next morning, there were a lot of tears when we explained to Paul the disaster of the night before. Janet comforted him, and in a moment of pity informed Paul that they would follow Ralph each morning in the garden, waiting for nature to take its course, and inspect Ralph's ablutions for the missing visor. This was okay by me, because I would be well on my way to work when these inspections were taking place. So for the next 3 days, Janet duly poked and prodded in Ralph's leavings, with a tearful Paul in attendance, until one morning, joy of joy, there was the visor, which in true Star Trek tradition had boldly gone where no visor had gone before. Janet and Paul triumphantly and very carefully transported the offending visor, very offending visor, on the end of a stick up to the bathroom, where it was to be scientifically decontaminated. Unfortunately, not being an avid science fiction devotee, Janet showed her lack of understanding of fluid dynamics and black holes, or in this case, bleach water and plug holes. In her eagerness to clean the visor, she forgot to put the plug in the plug hole, and to her utter dismay, which was quickly confirmed by a bawling Paul, the visor disappeared on another amazing journey into, this time, our waste plumbing. I returned home from work that evening to a house that bore all the hallmarks of a family in mourning. I quietly went upstairs, removed the waste trap from the wash basin, retrieved the visor, and proudly presented it to an overjoyed Paul. So it is for these following things I appeal to the Collective for forgiveness. The Collective being a name that still fills me with dread, as all Star Trek devotees will know, because it's associated with the dreaded Borg Collective, and so I fear you will condemn me to be assimilated, a fate worse than death. Yeah. Okay. I asked for forgiveness for deliberately leaving the toy out to be hidden by Ralph and causing untold distress to my son through the consequences of my actions. I asked for forgiveness for leaving my wife to prod through dog mess for 3 whole days. And finally, I asked forgiveness for basking in the glory for 25 years for being the final rescue of the visor, when actually I was the cause of the problem at the outset. I humbly petition that you forgive me and that may you live long and prosper.
Well done.
Notice no apology to the dog for actually having to have this thing and then to sort of pass it.
Well, he didn't have to swallow it, did he?
Well, I suppose there was... Well, I know it was an instinct.
That visor didn't want to be in that house. It wanted to be somewhere else,
yes.
Clearly. I think... well, I know how annoying it is when my son leaves his Lego everywhere and he doesn't tidy it up. And he never tidies it up, and I always end up doing it, or my husband ends up doing it. So it is annoying. On the other hand, to have your wife prodding through dog poo for 3 days is a bit much.
Really.
If I was Alan, I would have just got a new Geordie figure, I think. I mean, they can't be that expensive. I mean, rather than having your wife do that. So I think, Alan, you're not forgiven, I'm afraid.
Mother Superior, what would you have done?
Well, first of all, how big was this visor? Would it have been a tiny, weeny, tiny
6
little
foot
thing?
by 6 foot.
No, seriously, how
yes,
big?
it would probably... I don't know. It would probably be a couple of centimetres long.
Oh,
I
well,
suppose.
and second of all, I had no idea it would take 3 days to get something in to out. That's a long time,
You would have
isn't
thought it might have been in and out sooner than that.
Well, exactly.
Given the length of the intestine of the dog.
Well, I don't know how long a dog's intestine is. You might know that.
It's only a matter of time before we're sent a photograph.
So anyway, I mean, I just think it is very distressing for children. All of us who've had kids and they've lost a dear thing know how distressing it is. So I think on the you didn't have to put him into that kind of distressful situation. So on that basis and that basis alone, it's your fault. So I don't forgive you.
Brother Matthew, how say you?
I'm not. I've got to admit, I'm not a massive Star Trek fan, but I've never heard of Geordie LaForge, which strikes me as a very sort of comedy name.
Star Trek: The Next Generation. See, so
yeah, it's sort of like French Geordie LaForge, very French sounding. It doesn't sound right.
No.
No.
So the French would never make it.
No, they'd never be on Star Trek. So I don't know about this, because I don't think if I asked my wife to start sorting through dog mess in the garden, whether that would, for 3 days on the trot, whether that would go down well, or whether I would find myself actually going to Hamleys and picking up another Geordie LaForge.
Or any other toy store.
Or other toy stores are available, obviously. So I am going to not forgive, because how on earth are you asking your wife to go through dog mess?
Very noble and surprising there.
Yes, it is. Yes, not quite morals of a sewer rat,
no,
it turns out.
Because I would have thought it was the boy's fault for being stupid.
Yeah, oh, there you go. No, I'm sticking.
People's verdict, please do you forgive Alan for all the aforementioned crimes, and we'll take tantrum-based confession, space-based confessions,
yes,
action figure-based confessions,
oh yes,
dog-based confessions. What do you have? It's confessions@bbc.co.uk, or you can go via the website. So here we go, it's confession time, everybody, and this is from Robert. Robert says, Dear Father Simon, listening to the interesting piece on the origins of peanut butter on your show on my way home last week reminded me of a dreadful deed I was responsible for some 30 years ago. Yes, it's the first, I think it's the only peanut butter confession that we've ever had. In fact, every time I have toast and peanut butter, as I am now, white toast, real butter and crunchy peanut butter, always the best combination, I think back in shame to the consequences of a snap decision I made back in my days as a sixth form student. Let me set the scene. So lovely is peanut butter that during our free periods at school, known officially as study periods of course, my friends and I would take it in turns to go to each other's homes on our little 50cc mopeds and have a few rounds of toast and crunchy peanut butter together, washed down with mugs of tea before returning to school in time for our next lesson an hour later. As growing lads, we'd often polish off a whole loaf of bread and full jar of peanut butter between us, much to our mother's puzzlement, as she never knew that we'd been round. We'd get into trouble for missing our study periods, so we're always very careful to clean up and leave our kitchens as we found them, other than the depleted stocks of bread and peanut butter, of course. Often we were asked, have you seen that jar of peanut butter I bought the other day? No, Mum, we'd say, feigning innocence. I've not seen it. Perhaps you forgot to buy some this week, you and your memory, etc. This went on for months, with at least 5 confused mothers wondering where all the peanut butter had gone. Occasionally, if our friends were in lessons, we'd go home on our own to kill time. One day, however, it all went wrong. I went home on my own to indulge my passion for toast and crunchy peanut butter, and to build up my resilience, ready for a dose of double economics back at school, a subject I hated. My mum had just bought a kitten, as she craved some proper company in a house full of lazy teenage boys and a dad whose shift work as a police officer meant he was often working evenings. On this fateful day, I was easily distracted by the playful kitten, who was called Nookie, by the way. It was very embarrassing when Mum actually shouted its name from the front door every evening to call it home for bed in a silly high-pitched voice. Anyway, I digress. I lost track of time playing with the kitten, and when I realised I only had 10 minutes to get back to school, I quickly washed up, put the kitten in his basket, closed the front door, sat on my moped. Of course, in my rush, I'd left my keys inside the house. Knowing that getting caught bunking economics again would get me into serious trouble at school, I panicked. Looking around the outside of the house, there were no windows open to climb through, so without thinking it through properly, I picked up a brick from the garden and broke the kitchen window around the back of the house, something that I almost immediately regretted. Anyway, I opened the latch, climbed in, picked up my keys. It then struck me that I'd get into even more trouble for breaking into my own home, whilst I should have been studying at school. So I left the rock on the patio outside the kitchen window to make it look as though there'd been a break-in, thinking that as nothing was missing or displaced, my parents would think the criminal had chickened out of burgling the house. Off I went and got back to school just in time. After 2 hours of mind-numbingly boring double economics, I returned home for tea. And then my heart sank. I drove my moped up the drive, parked it with a few deep breaths, entered my house. Dad was there with one of his police colleagues, taking fingerprints and looking for evidence. You remember he was a police officer. They were treating it like a crime scene. Over the next couple of hours, they tried to gather evidence. None of our neighbours had seen or heard anything. I pretended to show outrage about the burglar, telling Dad that I hoped he would be caught as soon as possible. Of course, no suspect was ever found. My guilt for not owning up began to subside over the next few weeks, but then hit me in waves when my parents announced that because they didn't feel safe in their own home, they were investing nearly £1,000 in a state-of-the-art burglar system, a lot of money in 1980.
Wow.
A lot of money now for a burglar system. Wow. 30-odd years later, I've still not told my parents. I can't. They're both now retired. They live in the same house, having upgraded their alarm system a couple of times since. I am rather ashamed to say that in my current job, as a teacher, I have a special responsibility for the moral education of my pupils, instilling in them the importance of being honest, to take responsibility for their actions and to own up if they did anything wrong.
Oh dear.
Please forgive me, Simon. After all, it did all stem from the love of crunchy peanut butter. I'm sure you'll understand. Well, there are mitigating circumstances. Whether that will wash with hardline Sister Rebecca, we'll find out.
It's amazing that his mother didn't realise if this peanut butter thing was going on for months and months. You know, he just managed to persuade her that she was going senile or getting forgetful.
I think that's what it was.
I think this is... Robert really didn't think it through, did he, when he threw the brick through the window? On the other hand, I can see why he didn't confess, because it's a terrible thing to have to confess to, that you've actually broken into your own house just to get your keys just because you wanted some peanut butter.
Because you were bunking
it
off
all
economics.
sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? So I can see why he put it off, and I can see that he probably felt incredibly guilty about the fact they had to fork out all this money for the alarm system. So I think, Robert, you've actually suffered enough because you felt all this guilt, and I'm going to forgive you.
Mother Superior.
Well, I just feel like a piece of toast and peanut butter at the moment with extra butter on it. It's really got my taste things going, hasn't it? Has it you?
Yes.
Yeah, I
could always do with some peanut butter, because this is the peanut butter time.
Smooth or crunchy?
Crunchy.
Yeah, every time crunchy. OK, well, I think I'm going to forgive you because, you know, because I am.
That'll do.
No, because I don't think, you know, your fingerprints wouldn't have been on the records, would they? So embarrassing as it might have been for your dad to have had to arrest his own son, that never happened. It was a mistake, but you're forgiven.
Now, Brother Matt, whose fault was this then?
Right, two things about
Yes.
this. One, you're prepared to break a window for some peanut butter. I mean, I like marmalade a lot, but I'm not prepared to start breaking any windows or break into people's house or even my own house in order to get some more marmalade at a certain time of the day. The other thing, I don't want to come over all CSI on this, but how is the brick on the patio if he's thrown it through the window to be able to get into the house? The brick would surely be inside, in the kitchen.
Maybe he held on to the brick and then...
I'm thinking he didn't think that through, which suggests to me that his dad wasn't that great a mind of a copper. But still, I still think that the fact that you're prepared to throw a brick through your own window to get peanut butter is reprehensible, and for that I am not going to forgive.
People's verdict, do you forgive Robert, please, for breaking into his own house just to bunk off economics and to eat peanut butter?
No.
88 291 will take peanut butter. butter confessions?
Yes.
Economics-based confessions?
Really?
Yes. Bunking off school?
Oh, loads of them.
Police confessions?
Yes, please. Maybe not.
Confessions at bbc.co.uk, or go via the website, please. Forgive me, collective, for I have sinned. This is a tale of wickedness which even the Mother Superior herself would find reprehensible. I'm not really expecting forgiveness, but I thought I'd give it a go. You never know your luck. It's the late 80s, and I'm in a school in the east of England. I hope that's vague enough for you. I'm the youngest of 3 boys, and my elder brothers, let's call them Tom and Dick, are already at university and beyond. Both have progressed with distinction. Tom was head boy and went on to get a first in engineering at Cambridge. Dick was a prefect and then left to read PPE, also at Cambridge. Our house was awash with certificates, awards, cups, medals, ribbons, trophies and photos, all testifying to the grand achievements of brothers Tom and Dick. I was proud of them too, of course. It's just that when you can remember nothing but non-stop praise for your brothers, after a while it starts to be a little irritating. Yes, I know Tom is a genius. Yes, I had realised that Dick is the master of all he surveys. Thanks for pointing it out. And no, let's not talk about the clubs and societies they run. It was a good job they didn't work for charity, or my particular circle of hell would have been complete. I, in comparison, was spectacularly ordinary. Mediocre, average, perfectly fine, but nothing, absolutely nothing, that would come near Tom and Dick. I knew it, they knew it, and everybody knew it. I worked as hard as I could, but just couldn't match the grades. My whole school life had been full of unfavourable comparisons with my brothers. When in music we put on a production of Joseph and his amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, and it gets to the bit where all the brothers all hate Joseph and think about either doing him in or selling him into slavery, we're supposed to feel on Joseph's side, but I'm afraid my sympathies were entirely with the rabble of murderous brothers. But as they were away most of the time, I just got on with my life. Much to my relief, at least I became a prefect, and my parents smiled broadly when I came home. Green and gold badge fixed to the lapel of my blazer. "Well done, Harry!" exclaimed my dad and patted me on the back. "Look at this, Jill," and he called my mother in. She too clapped her hands together and enthused noisily. 3 out of 3, she shrieked and hooted. "Well done, Harry!"
What?
So I was just shrieking and hooting.
Right, okay.
I believe it was even mentioned in the dreaded Boastful Family Christmas newsletter. Do you get those?
Oh,
Do you indulge in them?
No.
Balm had been rubbed in the family's wound. I was no longer the underachieving black sheep of the family, except, of course, that it was all a lie. I had never become a prefect. I had merely used a prefect's badge that I found in the changing rooms after football practice. It was in a wet corner with a comb and some hair, as I recall, where it had been kicked, and if I hadn't rescued it, it would have been lost and swept away. I saw it, and I knew immediately what I was going to do. I kept it in my room, in a shoebox, for 6 months, until the end of the year, when the prefects were announced. I knew I wasn't going to make the cut. My detention for flooding the toilet saw to that. But on the journey back from school, as I walked up the drive, I pinned the prefect's badge on my blazer for the first time, and the deed was done. In my house, I was a prefect. When I got up, I pinned the badge on. When I was on the way to school, I took it off. My parents didn't bother with school events or parents' evenings very much. They had a been there, done that approach. I think they went once and they didn't mention the prefect thing, and obviously the school wouldn't, because I wasn't one. And my folks still don't know. They still, this is like yesterday's confession for the first. They still think I was a prefect and never noticed that I was never wearing it on school photos. I'm a happily contented graphics designer with 2 kids on my own. I don't care if they get to be prefects or not, but I'm obviously sorry for the tissue of lies and the web of deception that I was responsible for. Now, I like that because I like the whole prefect thing, and I like that reference to the dreaded Boastful Family Christmas newsletter, because I think there are quite a few confessions about lies you've told in the family newsletter. Anyway, to the matters in hand. Harry, what are you saying?
I feel very sorry for Harry, actually, because there's nothing worse than having 2 high achievers as a brother, or 2 brothers in his case. I mean, my brother and sister were both incredibly high achieving, and it's horrible, and the pressure is awful. So for him to have gone so far as to have lied to everyone must have shown the pressure that was on him from his brother and sister, and also from, it's 2 brothers, and talking about myself here, and from his parents. So I completely forgive you, Harry, completely understand it.
Was only a prefect at home, Mother Superior?
No, well, Harry, first of all, I love your name. It's a great name. I do actually feel quite sympathetic towards you because I think there's nothing worse. I mean, I've got two brothers, a bit like Rebecca. Are they brothers or sisters, Rebecca?
One brother, one sister.
One brother, one. And they were always, much better of everything than I was. And so I do have some sympathy with you. It's nice to get a bit of attention. I completely get that. So, as far as I'm concerned, I hope we washed the prefect's bag before you put it on you, because if it was lying in the gutter with hair and stuff, it could have led to a major disease. It didn't. But anyway, you're forgiven, and great name.
OK, Brother Matthew, what do you say to Harry?
I'm slightly torn on this because I do sympathise with Harry and his high-achieving brothers and all that. And, yes, absolutely. But I think if I'd been him, what I would have done is I'd have included in those dreadful letters that they sent out at Christmas saying how well all of our children are doing. I'd have included a letter unbeknownst to them saying, and this is entirely a lie because I am not a prefect and very happy in my own skin. Thank you very much, but my parents are lying to you about how well we're doing because we're not. I'm just normal. They'd better get used to it. And if he'd done that, then I'd forgive, but he didn't, so I'm not.
So I think, said with passion, a moving speech.
Typical Sagittarian, I think you'll find.
That's right.
Yeah.
And because Jupiter's rising.
It is rising, so apparently.
It does depend what's rising.
Yes, it does.
So listen, prefect and head boilers and all that kind of stuff, but I reckon we're going to start Christmas confessions, and I think I'll do it on Monday, but lies that have come out of those newsletters.
Yes.
The newsletters, that'll be fine. So the people's verdict, please. Do you forgive Harry with his brothers Tom and Dick? Do you forgive the fake prefect confession? 88291, emails simonmayo@bbc.co.uk. 16 minutes to 6 o'clock. This is Radio 2 Drive Time Confession. This one comes from GBJ. Thank you, GBJ. Simon, I am a bad man. This episode took place 40 years ago, and I had to use a calculator to find that out. I was 19 years old. I joined the British Army. I was sent off to Germany, where I became a member of the BAOR, the British Army of the Rhine. In short, I was a Cold War warrior engaged in holding back the Russian communist hordes with the aid of lots of beer and bratwurst. I was a member of a well-known cavalry regiment, and we were equipped with chieftain tanks, 60-ton monsters that rattled out your fillings. The powers that be decided that to try and keep us interested and on the straight and narrow, a group of us would have to be sent on an exercise called adventure training. This would consist of travelling down to Bavaria in southern Germany and doing things like mountain climbing, drinking beer, sailing, drinking beer, canoeing, drinking beer. You get the picture. We set off in our 3-ton trucks and arrived several hours later at a place called Seeshaupt. It's beautiful. Mountains, a lake, green fields, sunshine, and a lovely gas tube supplying a beer on the lake shore. There's this kind of an alcoholic theme running through this. This was heaven. However, there appeared a fly in the ointment, a pimple on the fair face of fortune. The fly, the pimple, call it what you will, came in the form of a very unpopular officer. The man was a stickler for the unreasonable, a pernickety nitpicker of the first order. In short, he was a pain in the posterior. As is the way, the first duty on arrival was the digging and erection of the latrines. A trench was dug, and then Hessian screens were erected to afford some sort of privacy. Our officer wasn't too happy with this arrangement, and had it all altered, so that there was one latrine for the men and one for the officers, there being only one officer, and that was him. Now, these officers must be nobler and function differently to us more proletarian squaddies. Clearly, he didn't want to be anywhere near our more basic functions. Can't blame him for that, I suppose, but the extra work rankled a bit, especially as he was a shouty type of a man who would have us running around doing menial and pointless tasks. Now, it became obvious over the days that this officer was a man of routine. Every morning before breakfast, he would grump and huff his way across the camping field from his tent to the latrine, brackets, officers for the use of, close brackets. He would cross the field in his silk pyjamas and silk dressing gown, a copy of the Times under his arm. How he managed a copy of the Times, I have no idea, but it was a fixture. He was oblivious to the sideways looks and growls from the lads. This is only going to end nastily, by the way. Now, squaddies are simple souls. Keep them happy and they're no problem. If they're bored or if you upset them, they're going to get mischievous. And it was decided that it would be a good idea to discomfort this officer, and a plan was hatched. The following morning, the man in question took his usual walk and went into the Hessian shed, sat down and started to read. We were all standing around giggling like schoolgirls when someone produced a thunder flash. These are large pyrotechnics that are used to simulate grenade explosions under controlled circumstances. I don't know how it happened, but the aforementioned thunder flash appeared in my hand, and after several pushes from behind, I was propelled towards the officer's latrine. In the words of Oscar Wilde, I can resist anything but temptation. I lit the 7-second fuse, lifted the edge of the Hessian, and dropped it into the trench below the seated officer.
Ooh.
I then took to my heels and made like Usain Bolt, as we didn't say in those days. A discussion then started between the lads, things like, "Oh, you didn't light it properly, it must be a dud." I've since learned that Albert Einstein reckoned that some seconds last longer than others, and in this case I agree with him. There eventually was a large bang, and the Hessian side of the latrine expanded instantly, and a light brown cloud mushroomed everywhere. The rooks sitting in the trees took off and made for safety. We all stood open-mouthed as the officer staggered out of the latrine, now transformed into something like a grizzly bear in pyjamas. Thankfully, of course, he was uninjured. However, there wasn't an inch of the officer that was not covered. As he stood shouting, the posh toilet folded in on itself and collapsed once and for all. A cheer went up from the squaddies. A scream of "You!" went up from the officer. There's a word there which
I got that.
fill in the word of your choice. So now we come to the forgiveness bit, Father Simon. To be honest, I'm not feeling one bit guilty. The officer was, and I understand still is, a plank.
Really? All right.
I married a wonderful girl who became an ordained priest, and she forgave me years ago for being a complete idiot. She's very forbearing. I thought I would just mention this because you never know who listens to your programme, and it might prod a few ancient memories and bring a wry smile to the face of some old Cold War warriors. Thank you for your programme and the opportunity of telling my tale. Says GBJ, a story from the Cold War. Out in the British Army of the Rhine, Hessian toilet, the officer class.
So who is he seeking forgiveness?
He's not really.
Oh, I see.
But you, well,
Okay.
you guys.
From
He
us.
doesn't care about the officer, but forgiveness from you, the collective.
It's a difficult one because if I was a squaddy in his position, I wouldn't be able to stand the sight of the officer going to the latrine in his silk pyjamas and dressing gown and a copy of the Times. However, I think putting an explosive in the latrine. I know it was a mock explosive, but it could have been really dangerous. It could have caused some serious damage. And GBJ doesn't feel at all guilty about this. And I think he should feel a bit guilty.
Okay.
So I'm not going to forgive you.
Right.
Sorry.
What do you say, Mother Superior?
Well, I have to tell you, this is really, really spooky because I was an army brat, right? My dad was in the army and worked all over the world. And he has told me this story.
Exactly the same story.
He has told
Was he the man in silk
No,
pyjamas?
he wasn't the man in the silk pyjamas.
With the Times.
But he said it happened in Egypt. It didn't happen in Germany. So I'm a bit confused, really. But maybe they just did this prank all over the world. Maybe that's what it was. But I know this story very well. And actually, sometimes you can make this thing travel. So if there's other people sitting on them further down, they all get a little bit of burnt stuff.
Really?
On the way down. So no, but the man with the Times and the silk pyjamas sounds horrendous. Nobody likes a bully. So yeah, you're forgiven as far as I'm concerned.
Brother Matthew, I know what you're
I
going.
think, well, to be honest, my mind was made up as soon as this guy appears in silk pyjamas and the silk dressing room, and it made me think, actually, that's got to be made up. He didn't have silk pyjamas and a silk dressing
And a
gown.
copy of the Times.
And a copy of the Times. Surely not. Judging by the amount of beer being drunk here, I'm surprised we're not all speaking Russian, frankly. What were these guys doing other than drinking and throwing thunder flashes?
They were keeping the
onto
Russian
people's
hordes at
latrines?
bay.
Clearly not enough. So I am going to... Well, he's not interested in our forgiveness, really, is he?
No, he's not, but he's interested in your opinion.
Okay, I'm going to say forgiven. Why not? Because he
Okay.
had silk pyjamas on.
Nicely done. The people's verdict is due now, please. 88-291. Cold War confessions. They'd be fun. And there it is. Who did you forgive, if indeed you forgave anybody? Another collection of confessions for your delight and delectation next week. You can send yours via the website, or you can send us an email. Join us again on Monday when we will unleash another terrible tale onto the collective. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this BBC Radio 2 free download. Now, why not try more?
Jazz for me, I guess, is improvisation.
My pick of the best in rhythm and blues.
Music from Richard Thompson, Chris Wood and Pentangle, amongst many, many others.
All at the BBC Radio 2 website.